Because the one thing that the tech sector has always suffered from is that companies grow to be relatively large and then they end up acquired by American tech giants.
Sure.
And there are a few exceptions like Arm and a few other companies, but not as many as there should be given the balance.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of PolyAI's podcast, Deep Learning, the only podcast that does not care about the status of your car's warranty. So you will not get a call from us about that. Fair enough?
Are you sure we don't care?
We might. Who knows? It depends on when it comes time to pay the bills. Anyway, I'm your host, Damien. I'm here as usual with CEO and co-founder of PolyAI, Nikola Murchik. How are you, Nikola?
Good. I'm excellent. How are you?
Excellent. Doing well. I'm seeing a different background today. Looks like you're in a hotel. Where are you traveling to? Where in the world is Nikola today?
I'm in Memphis today. So yeah,
Memphis. Have you been on Beale Street?
I'm actually in the Western on Beale Street. So
Oh, nice. I'll be heading down to Nashville, the neighboring Tennessee, John, here very shortly. So look at us, strangers in the night. That's cool. Are you
yeah,
enjoying your time in Memphis?
I just got here, but yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. All right. Well, while you're in the Southeast, I thought what better time to talk about a big announcement that was coming out of the UK recently, the AI Opportunities Action Plan, backed by Peter Kyle, backed by Kier. Let's talk a little bit about what this means to the startup scene, late stage, new stage, established industries with regards to the official sanctioned, we support AI and the burgeoning AI industry here in the kingdom. I thought we may get your initial reaction on it, then go through some of the components that was announced during the AI Opportunities Action Plan. All these things are such a mouthful, and just kind of go from there. Sound good?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I think that the UK is one of the poles of AI development historically, right? From the early days at the University of Edinburgh to a lot of the work done at Cambridge and London, um, the Alan Turing Foundation, DeepMind, etc. Like it's a powerhouse, and it has been. But both the UK and Canada, as the two places that are not American, are contributing a lot to global AI. Of course, China has caught up and is like top two with America now.
Mhm.
The other Western countries have just been suffering from immense brain drain and a pull of both its academics, researchers, all the way to companies like ours, which, we started as a British company. Then we became an Anglo-American one, and now we are predominantly in revenue an American company, right?
Sure.
So the pull of the American market and resources is something that the closest American allies really have to contend with if they hope to keep any of it for themselves. And I think that this plan is very much about mobilizing immense resources to ensure everything from like sovereignty and long-term sustainability
Yeah.
of the UK's, differential in an ability to stay a leading contributor, owner, and like beneficiary of AI development.
I think it's fair. And with some of the components of this plan, like the growth zones, obviously the government standing up and saying, with regards to the public sector's involvement, we plan on investing more directly in technology in our operations and the way that we're approaching constituent services, et cetera. This is very promising, not only for the nation as a whole being a more fertile and supported grounds for AI startups and people within the industry, but also maybe broader industries at large, basically getting the thumbs up saying you should feel confident in adopting these technologies within your business workplace. So for organizations like ours, obviously it's very promising. It's nice to know we can now call up like freely and say, hey, what's going on? How do we get PolyAI in the house, right? But let's talk a little bit about general economic impact. Obviously, the plan outlines the strategy for AI to drive economic growth. That's like key with the growth zones and the like. We're in you could consider us a late stage startup, right? So from just the founder and the CEO of a late stage startup's perspective, and one that's muscled through some not so supportive, early fundraising efforts in an environment that didn't have the resources that we saw in other Western countries. How do you see AI-driven initiatives like this plan, influencing not only the success of those early stage startups, but also just maybe broader swaths of UK industries?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that a large part of this plan is to do with like attracting talent, global talent into the UK.
Hmm.
and creating the fundamental and really capital intensive things like data centers, including the, like energy needed for the compute that will be involved, right? And kind of like things needed for it to be in the country, right? So I think those are just like capital intensive things, and it's really good that the government is thinking about it. And Matt Clifford, who wrote the action plan, is a close friend of the company. PolyAI was started in his accelerator, Entrepreneur First.
Oh, nice.
He's
Best plan ever, Matt. Thank you for all your efforts.
Matt's a really, really great guy. And he's been a close friend and advisor to PolyAI, right? And I think that everyone in the UK will tell you that he has done a tremendous amount to promote startups, the tech ecosystem, to funnel a lot of the talent that has traditionally in the UK gone into banking and consulting as a default career track.
Hmm.
Um, we do not have the equivalent of the Silicon Valley yet. We are the healthiest and strongest tech ecosystem in Europe, and have been for some time. But I think that Matt was a big part of getting a lot of really talented people to move out of McKinsey, the McKinseys of the world, and the investment banks, and into tech ecosystem. So I think past that, he's worked a lot to create kind of like the institutional framework and support for this ecosystem to flourish. So I
So
think
how
that
does how do you think that that translates to this plan? Because, like you said, the talent dearth has been directed towards consultancies, finance historically in the past. Now we're looking at this government sanctioned plan that is committed to building up this AI talent, skilled workforce, right? So do you think that both the public sector and like universities, as well as the private sector, are all equally responsible in fostering this next generation of AI leaders?
I think it's really hard to like plan and to answer that question. I think that what a government can do is just provide the right like framework and the right resources for the thing to flourish. Like we know we'll need compute, we know we'll need um, things like GPUs, data centers, etc. So I think it's
Mhm.
that those things that take time to ramp and resources that should be protected. Um, I think it's really important that that's being addressed, right? Uh, that's just like I think fertile soil for the tech ecosystem to continue to grow and advance. I think in terms of like the use in public sector or even the private sector, like promoting the adoption and purchases of this kind of software. I don't know. I mean, I sat at a government tech panel, and one thing that always struck me was the English insistence on kind of like free trade, right, and belief in it. In today's Europe and even perhaps the world, right? The more we talk now about tariffs and everything else,
Mhm.
puts puts the Brits at a bit of a disadvantage because if you are not the global hegemonic power and you adhere to free trade while others adopt more protectionist measures, you stand to lose, right? Because you're opening yourself up when others are propping their industries up. So I think that committing to do more with their own companies would be really important if we want to see the creation of a Google or a Facebook, Microsoft in the UK. Because the one thing that the tech sector has always suffered from is that companies grow to be relatively large and then they end up acquired by American tech giants.
Sure.
And there are a few exceptions like Arm and a few other companies, but not as many as there should be given the talent. So I think that um, I don't know if that's something the government can fix as much as it's just an ecosystem that needs to develop. Um, but I think this is a step in a good direction.
Well, like you said, the resources need to be there, right, in order to stay competitive on a global front. And so with this bold public statement, UK sort of asserting itself as being a global AI leader that deserves to be among the ranks of the States and China with a close second, et cetera. Um,
I mean,
what else? You mentioned a few things like
yeah.
access to data, right? Creating fostering environments for the ability to draw from the compute that's necessary. What else do you think that the country can do to differentiate itself from other tech hubs like Silicon Valley, like China, but still maintain that competitive edge?
Well, I mean, the strength. If we put China to the side, because I think that's a different story.
This
Uh,
is true.
if you just look at kind of like creating something comparable to the Silicon Valley, well, like you need the massive capital and resources available, and that we don't have. So the government's setting aside a serious amount of money to help promote that, can at least help the UK definitely stay that leading European contender, right? Because as much as the UK has lost talent in America, uh, it has been a net recipient of talent from at least around Europe and much of the world as well, right? I think that one sector in the UK that is still world leading is the education one, especially higher education. I think you probably get like 3 or 4 out of the top 10 Western universities are in the UK, right? And that,
Okay.
the UK per capita punches well above its weight there, right? So it means that it has a funnel of those people coming. So the people are there, right? I think the one thing that currently is not, if you were just to look at it as like a sovereign kind of like ecosystem needed for AI, is like the amount of compute and just the power needed for those data centers as they grow.
Mhm.
The in huge investments in America by companies in creating this. And I think that in the UK, if you just don't have that company that's going to do it there with like kind of like first and foremost like a British view of it, then you probably need the government to stand behind that effort, right?
If there are optics behind it, though, do you think that's probably the object of least concern is who's providing the power, or or the infrastructure, or do you? I know infrastructure is a part of this plan, but do you think it's the most one of the more important parts?
I think it's one of the more capital intensive ones, and
Oh,
that
absolutely.
I think that it's basically for a government to provide. It's easier to provide that like than to create a nuanced approach to like, hey, this is how we're gonna like do this thing specifically or create this kind of company. Like a government has, I think, no part to play in the micro strategy there, but it has something. It can do a lot more in just kind of like creating the necessary prerequisites for those big companies to emerge, right?
Yeah.
And the other
All right.
thing is just like regulation, right? So I think the UK again has like an opportunity to nearshore undermine the EU AI Act in creating an environment where it's easier to do business, right? And in doing that, it can hopefully influence Brussels towards a more lenient approach because when you're third in a race globally for Europe as a whole, including the UK, you don't step on the regulation. You actually promote deregulation so that you can punch above your weight.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say when it comes to regulation and policy, I mean, I am curious about how this plan is going to either help or hinder existing policy creation in the UK. When you look at the fact that Britain's been pretty critical of the EU AI Act for being too centralized in its construction and its oversight. Do you think that this plan as a whole signals a little bit of a national change in heart, or do you think it's sort of an entry point to, as you were mentioning, for Brussels to just sort of like ease the reins a bit?
I don't think this is in any way like targeted at Brussels, right? I think this is really about, creating an internal Marshall Plan style initiative to put a lot of money into a sector where it'll give a lot back to the country and its future. Um, and I think it should just be looked at from like a British perspective, right? It's like there to long term create a much more competitive economy that is investing in, you know, the technology of the future.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's obvious. I just wonder what this means with regards to the UK's sentiment being like not beholden to the EU AI Act, but obviously in operations with neighboring sister countries in Europe, you kind of have to abide by it. So therefore, like compliance by proxy. Is this something where you think this is a stepping stone to more formalized regulation specific to the UK? Or is it something that's basically saying we'll play by your rules, but we're setting our own plan and it's going to be largely decentralized and a little less regulated than what the EUAI Act has in store?
I'm not seeing much reference to the EU AI Act, and here I've seen, just the general like comments on safety. And again, I think it's very oriented towards just a roadmap of expanding British capabilities on
Yeah.
both in terms of safety, capabilities, compute, energy. So, yeah, I think that
To me, the idea of this plan that's really fostering the industry, it's sort of taking the foot off the back of the neck. So it indicates a step towards deregulation or lesser regulation that maybe exists. So I was just wondering if you had a
Well,
similar
I mean,
perspective.
2024 says that uh, the goal is to reform the UK text and data mining regime so that it is at least as competitive as the EU, right? So I think that's the closest reference I can find to, um, I don't see a huge deviation from the EU there, right?
Okay,
In
fair enough.
what's
One thing that exists there, as well as something that we've talked about in the past, I'd say late 2024, when the Council of Europe announced their framework convention on artificial intelligence. There were a bunch of other things that came afterwards: human rights, democracy, rule of law, a whole bunch of little qualifiers. Very very wordy. But one of the big focal areas is ethics. And I know it's not maybe the most spicy topic when it comes to responsible and ethical use of AI, but it does seem to be a foundational tenet in all of these action plans, regulation, guide points, et cetera. When we're taking a look at the ethics that's outlined in the action plan, there is a little bit of an emphasis on the importance of ethical AI development, right? We see this again as sort of a foundation of most global policies. Most regulatory frameworks have some piece that ties into ethical and responsible deployment of AI and utilization of AI. Um, do you think that ethics is overblown? I hate to say it, but do you think that ethics is overblown, or that maybe this is just a, what's a good way to put it? Sort of a little bit of a dangly earring for the outfit that is AI regulation or action plans or something to that effect. Do you think it's something that's there to just appease the people, maybe AI theorists that think that, supporting this industry means allowing for the robots to take over down the road? Is ethics really that much of a concern?
I don't think so. I think that, the whole kind of like ESG bandwagon is currently, under retreat. And I think that, um, like there used to be a lot more talk of this. I think there is like an element of just like ethical AI versus like safety. And then safety is more to do with what you mentioned around like people's fears and stuff.
Right.
Um, Again, I think that's, um, it's a bit of a red herring, right? The whole like, Terminator scenario. The
Yeah.
thing that's actually a lot more relevant is the socioeconomic impact, which will be huge. But I think where you see this thing focused is, um, the ethical. When I think of ethics and things that I've read in the action plan, it's more really about like what data is collected in the public sector, how it's used, and like organizing that effort so that it's both systematic and ethical, and that it creates a valuable resource for the UK to use, right? Because I think for a lot of countries right now, public data sets, think of like like NHS data sets and stuff.
Mhm.
A lot of value there that can be monetized and also just used for a lot of public good for creating new, drugs for drug discovery, for medicine. And I think that, taking just a proactive approach around like starting from like good ethical, foundations, principles to like how we're gonna use and providing again people just clarity around that so that people can go about pursuing those opportunities. And I think like with much regulation, people just need an element of certainty and an understanding of what the rules of the game will be.
I think that's where clarification comes down the road. I remember years back, I think when we started this podcast, very, very early on, we were talking about how governments can support, AI, the AI industry. As at that point, it was, it wasn't as on a meteoric rise, but it was pretty startling with regards to how fast the industry was growing. And one of the earliest things that we talked about, me, you, Yen, back in the day, was access to data sets, public data sets. Like,
Yep.
it's essential. That's what sort of normalizes seats at the table with regards to big tech coming in. Smaller tech coming in is having access to these public data sets and how essential that is. Now it looks like this is at least a flag that indicates, hey, all right, we're looking to go there. But to your point, we need more clarity. What does that mean? Like, to
Yeah.
what level of access are we going to have? How is it shared? How is it delivered? Um, Aside from that piece that needs clarification, what do you think are some other areas that maybe are going to be fine tuned or might be under the microscope as this plan rolls out?
Yeah. I mean, like, one lens to look at it is like, as they talk about like the AI development zones and stuff, it like, sounds a bit like the early days of DARPA and other initiatives where, you
Oh,
put a lot of money into like a specific pursuit of a technology, right? And like I think that's good. Like I think that like through focusing the efforts on that, you're kind of like, much like with public projects like transport, where you can't really quantify the long-term benefit of a high-speed rail between two cities, right? Like, sure, you can put down any ROI calculation, and it may or may not make sense, right? I think that here, it's pretty uncontroversial that like more of this will make a country a bigger participant in the market share of the companies of the future, right? So, um, I think I think this is a really good thing, and I think that at a time where people can't seem to agree on anything politically, right?
Yeah.
On from immigration to any other form of like taxation and allocation of resources. Um, I think this is a fairly non-controversial thing to pile effort in so that we all benefit in the future. So, as a naturalized British citizen, I think this is a pretty good.
Timing wise, did it come a little too late?
I don't think so. Again, look, this is something that will be going on for a while. I think the UK for a long time has been a phenomenal place to do AI research, to
Mhm.
build AI companies, right? Um, and I don't think much will change in that perspective, right? I think the public sector stuff is good. I think
Yeah.
that we already do serious work with a number of government bodies, both directly and through other partners. You can always do more, right? So
Right.
whatever the government and affiliated entities do to make that easier, the better it is for the UK as a whole, in that services will improve for all citizen and for hopefully British AI companies that are there to provide that service. And I think the UK has a pretty long legacy of good digital transformation. You're probably not familiar with the Gov UK website, but as kind of like a pool of resources for anything that you have to do with the state, right? Whether it's like your MOT for your car or getting a driver's license, a passport, paying taxes, etc. There is like a really nice like web ecosystem where you can kind of like just go about your life and do things online in a very streamlined way with high certainty and trust in like, doing your civic duties and those things. And
Yeah, there's a part of me that doesn't want to look at the gov.uk website because I will be sitting here in tech jealousy of the fact that we still operate on a very archaic system of pen and paper with regards to a lot of critical governmental services like taxes here in the States. It blows me away with how backwards we are
you
and
would
troglodytic a bit on adopting technology to make
you
those
you would
processes earlier.
you would absolutely, right. And I think that again, America is bigger, 50 states. The UK has 4 countries, right?
Yeah.
So it's not non-complicated, but it is less complicated, right? And I
Okay.
think
Fair
that
enough.
for a lot of administrative tasks in the US, you still kind of like have people as a default working through lawyers. In the UK, the self-serve spirit of it is a lot easier to go about if you're willing to just read a few things and submit a few documents.
All right. Sounds good. Well, all the more reason to raise that flag and say, hey, uh, God save the king because the AI opportunity action plan is here for our industry. But cool. Well, I appreciate your time. Pleasure as always to talk with you, Nicola. Any last comments on this AIOAP?
No, no, no.
No?
I think it's exciting. I think that we're excited to be part of the British like AI ecosystem, and I think there are a lot of great things to come. So the more work people put in to just like help the whole thing grow, like the better for everyone.
Awesome. Sounds good. All right, Nicola, take care. For the rest of you, we'll talk to you next week.